FinCrime Unfiltered is proudly supported by Hummingbird. Hummingbird is a modern compliance platform designed to make financial crime investigations smarter, faster, and more effective. Because today's financial criminals are sophisticated, savvy, and agile, meaning the tools used to fight them should be too. Learn more at hummingbird.co. Hello and welcome to episode 12. This is FinCrime Unfiltered. I'm Sarah Beth Felix. Thank you for joining us again. As you may be able to tell, I'm a little under the weather. I think that's what happens when you try to be all things to all people. And I have so many strangers touching all of the food and drink and all of the things that, I don't know. It caught up with me. So I apologize if you're listening to this and it's annoying because I'm a little congested. But, there's no rest for the weary. So onward we go. We have lots of things to talk about today. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say thank you again for all the nice comments and emails, the requests for additional information that I keep offering every episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. You can always email us at fincrimeunfiltered@illicitedge.com. And if you're only listening to the podcasts on Spotify and Apple and other streaming platforms, and you're not aware that there's a video version where you can see me with my eyes rolling all of the facial expressions, you can catch that on the YouTube channel for Illicit Edge, the FinCrime Unfiltered podcast there. I've heard from a few people over the last couple months that they did not know that there was a video version. So if you're listening to this, there is a video version. Please check it out. All right. So I think if you have followed me on LinkedIn for any amount of time, you know that every once in a while, I like to stir the pot, kick the hornet's nest. I don't know, whatever other phrase there is out there. And today I wanted to talk about a few things. One, there was an OFAC penalty, a sanctions penalty issued this week. There were some joint agency guidelines that came out for the safeguarding of crypto from the U.S. federal banking agencies. And then I wanted to talk a quick lesson on audits. I'm going to do it in reverse order so I can kick the hornet's nest right off the bat with a quick lesson on audits. And I had started thinking about talking about this. I know I've talked a little bit about it in certain scenarios in other episodes, but this one I really wanted to give everyone a heads up because I've seen too much over the last, decade plus of being in community banks, being in credit unions, being in fintechs before they were even called fintechs, money service businesses. And as a recovering auditor, I still dabble in auditing, but as somebody who has a high standard for audits, both when I was an AML officer and I demanded a high quality product from my external auditor, but also as somebody who then went to the dark side and began auditing, you should definitely have a high standard. And I know it's difficult because there are executives at institutions that don't want the audit to say what you want it to say. So I know that resistance exists, but the thing I want to talk about today is if you are a traditional financial institution and you are relying in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a formal reliance or in your brain is offsetting some type of risk associated with your customer as a traditional financial institution. So we're talking about your customers that you may be banking that also get audits, and that's part of your due diligence process. You request that. But also audits that you would get as a traditional financial institution and also audits that you would get as an MSB. I'm talking about all of those ways in which an audit can impact you. As I've said a million times before, If it's a clean audit, it is not a good audit. But I think what I'm starting to see is a trend of bad audits that it's not just relegated to the TradFi world, where I'm working with traditional financial institutions and looking at their portfolios and their special banking that they do, and even those audits that I'm reviewing for their customers, those are also bad. And the reason why that's important is because an examiner for a TradFi is not going to go look at the audit of your customer. So if you're a traditional financial institution, you're banking a fintech or a money service business of some kind, your examiner is not going to then go look at the quality of the audit that you're safely relying on for your customer to see whether or not it's high quality. And I wouldn't expect them to. I would expect the auditor for the traditional financial institution to sample that for sure. And I would definitely expect the traditional financial institution, that bank or credit union that's banking that fintech or that MSB, to really dive into it, not just checkbox. I know that we kind of talk about checkbox exercises and we talk about how, we need to move beyond that. But I feel like a lot of people in that AML officer function or that management function within the AML group, they too often use a checkbox to say, yeah, that MSB has an audit check without looking at the quality of the audit. And I want to talk specifically about suspicious activity. If I had $1 for every time I've seen an audit, not an exam, an audit, without a whiff of testing suspicious activity effectiveness, I would be living on a tropical island somewhere. You probably wouldn't, I would not be doing this. That's how often this occurs. And I know I'm probably kicking some people in the shins, and I don't mean to, because I have heard from, two people that there's some rumblings that all I do is criticize. And I hope that, one, that's not the case. That's maybe just the episodes that they're catching. But two, that when I am critical, one, it's due, but that it spurs auditors to change. If you're not asking for data, if you're an auditor and you're performing an AML audit and you are not asking for raw transactional data, then you are missing the boat, full stop. Like, the exam manual, which is the playbook for regulators essentially, but most auditing firms use that as their guide to performing an audit. We have to incorporate the transaction testing aspects of that manual into the auditing process. So examiners are responsible for ensuring that your audit contains evidence of testing. In fact, there's a statement there that talks about MIS, which I think is funny, and it just speaks to how old the manual is, which is what I talked about last episode. Management Information System. It's like 1999 called, and they want their IT terms back. But there's a section in the transaction testing part where they talk about how auditors and examiners should be checking that auditors reviewed the information technology, sources, system, processes, etc., that support the program to make sure that they're getting the suspicious activity that they should be getting. And it's been a long time coming, because when I'm on site with clients and I ask for data, typically in a validation, so not even a formal audit capacity, but in a validation capacity, I ask for data and they look at me like I have 3 heads. And then the next thing I know, they have the head of IT and the head of operations and the head of this department in, trying to tell me that I don't need this, that no one's ever asked them for this information before. And I'm gobsmacked. I don't know what to do with that. We've had an exam manual that, since the first iteration of the exam manual, since 2005, it has been clear that we have to look at the MIS reports, again, old school point, but we have to look at what I deem to be data. That's what they're talking about, the MIS and information technology and those terms that they're using in the exam manual. They're talking about data. So if you're an auditor, and I don't care if you're working for one of the big fours or if you're on your own, if you're not looking through their raw data to find suspicious activity to make sure that their AML system is finding what they should be finding, then you have no business being in auditing. And I'm saying that, and I know I'm probably going to offend some people, but I'm saying that because the last, well, not last 18 months, but minus 6 months, but starting in January, the last 18 months prior to that, we saw again and again and again, every single consent order criticized the institution for having an ineffective audit function, which is a pillar. If you are an AML officer, I know it is not fun for somebody to come in and call your baby ugly. That's what one of my good friends in the industry always says. She always says, man, when you came in and did our audit, you basically told me my baby was ugly. And I was like, no, I didn't. I was trying to help. But it's not fun. It's not fun when somebody comes in and says, you missed the boat. But I'm telling you, it is a heck of a lot better than an examiner coming in saying, you missed this suspicious activity. Here's your look back. Which one would you rather have? I know most people would say the former option. So while it's not fun, and I know a lot of times we take it personal, right? We say, oh my gosh, if I have an audit issue, I must have done something wrong. And I think a lot of times it's women that kind of have that ownership. And I would encourage you to think like a man. Kind of put that aside, right? This is not a like you did something wrong. Try to take a look at it, removing the ownership that you may have of your program and say, why did I miss that? And I will tell you, 9.9 times out of 10, the reason is because you don't have enough bandwidth, which means you don't have enough people. And it I have yet to find an AML officer where I'm in there and I'm like, sorry, I found all these issues, and they're looking at me like, I cannot believe you did this to me. And I'm like, all right, let's have a discussion. And then as they start talking to me, the first thing that you can diagnose is the fact that they don't have enough people. So they either have really, really bad tech, or they don't have enough people, but they don't know that they have bad tech because they don't have enough bandwidth to go find out how bad their technology is. And again, that all comes back to not having enough people. So I would say the next time that you get a clean audit, instead of going, whew, I'm going to pat myself on the back, I got a clean audit, I would hand that audit back to the auditor. And I don't care, again, if they're a big four company, hand that audit back and say, your job is to be my partner in this. You are supposed to find something that moves the needle for me in my effectiveness. You need to find something. And I'm not going to accept this until you find something material. And hear me out. I'm not saying if they give you an audit report and it says that you missed 5 CIP, self-imposed deadlines for collecting Social Security, you transposed a date of birth on 5 CTRs, you were a day late on a CTR. I'm not talking about that. That stuff is immaterial. I'm talking about the stuff that matters. The whole reason why we do anything of what we do is to find suspicious activity, report it in a timely and effective manner to our law enforcement partners, full stop. That is the whole reason why we file CTRs. That's the whole reason why we do any of the cash aggregation, why we collect any of the CIP data, why we collect beneficial owners, all of the other stuff that's not material to the spirit of what we're doing. If your audit report is full of that to me is still a clean audit report. That means that they haven't looked. And if your auditor in their scope is not talking about how they're going to look at your data, look at your MIS, right? Or your data that you have, and they don't request that in the request list, that's your red flag for that auditor, that auditor's not going to give you the service that you're paying for. All right. I know I came out of the gate pretty hot on that, but The reason why is because it's not just a traditional financial institution issue. Bad auditors plague money service businesses. I just got finished reading 6 different firms and their audit reports, and I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked. I am talking like these money service businesses, you know, some of them are check cashers, some of them are gold dealers, etc. Some of them are remitters, some of them are exchangers, what have you. But the policy of some of these MSBs to avoid having to file CTRs is to lower the cash dollar amount that they allow to happen for one customer in one day. And the majority of them are between 9,000 and 9,990, which makes me chuckle when I read it because I'm like, oh, then they're forcing their customers to structure. And then I'm looking at the years of audit reports that they've received with 0 SARS, big fat goose egg, 0 SARS filed in years. And I'm talking tens of millions of dollars almost on a monthly basis, some of these money service businesses. 0 SARS filed, yet they're requiring their customers to structure, and the auditor has no issue with any of it. And in the scope, there was no testing done of their own to see whether or not there were no SARS filed, to see whether or not there were investigations to justify why the forced structuring should not have resulted in a SAR. It was, I chuckled and then I was disheartened, because one, as a business owner, like somebody's actually paying for that product and that's a crap product. Sorry to be so direct about it, but like you're paying for a product, you should get a good product. And a lot of MSBs, they don't necessarily have a ton of money, and so they're paying for this, and the product that they're getting is not really getting to the heart of the matter. Okay, I've spent way too much time talking about this, but it comes up again and again in the other things we're going to talk about. A poor audit function, a weak audit function, an auditor that can't think like a criminal will kill your audit pillar. So the lesson learned here is if your scope doesn't talk about testing your data, if in the request list they are not asking for raw data, cash, foreign wires, P2P, ACHs, even if it's for a short amount of time, if they aren't requesting those things, then you need to push back, because once you've received a request list, it's because you've signed the proposal. You need to push back and say, hey, I thought y'all were going to test this according to how the exam manual lays out your testing procedures. So I would just encourage you to get good auditors. I have a very, very, very short list, like this big, of auditors that I trust, that I know how to be a good partner to a traditional financial institution as well as non-traditional FIs. So if you want, you can always email us, FinCrimeUnfiltered@illicitedge.com, or find me on LinkedIn at I Follow Dirty Money. Okay, let's move on to the second one. The joint agencies, that would be OCC, FDIC, and Federal Reserve. They issued the Safeguarding Crypto document. I was surprised, yet not surprised, that the NCOA was nowhere to be found. They were not part of this guidance. And that's alarming to me, again, and I know I've talked about this in other episodes, because we know that credit unions are historically not held to the same stringent standard of examination for safety and soundness as their bank counterparts. And it's unbelievably unfair. If we want to talk about why we keep losing community banks, why they keep failing, why they keep getting gobbled up by credit unions, it's because they don't have the same, how do I say this? The same heaviness of burden that that banks have. Their credit union counterparts do not have them. And I know I'll ruffle more feathers with that. At some point, I'll stop ruffling feathers, maybe. But the NCOA hasn't really issued similar guidelines, or rather, they haven't joined in with their other sister agencies for either the third-party risk management stuff or crypto. And there's been a few other things where they have not been part of the joint agencies. But what was interesting was it 2 weeks ago, where the joint agencies, including the NCOA on this one, they did join in on the rollback of CIP, which I thought was interesting. So the NCOA will join in on the rollback of CIP, but they won't join in when it comes to talking about safeguarding crypto or third-party risk management. I just think that's something special. At any rate, there's some guidelines. There's some takeaways. I think for me, when I look at these guidelines, I look at them obviously from a sanctions and AML lens, because that's the world that I live in. And they did have a section on compliance, right? Just general compliance, which, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you know that I do not lump sanctions and AML or financial crime into the general world of compliance. And I think firms that do are missing the boat. You cannot be really, really, really good at all other compliance and also be really good at financial crime compliance. Like, you have to pick a horse. So this kind of like lumped into there, but they did talk about that a, a bank should involve its BSA officer and its board and its senior management in assessing the money laundering risks. And the word that they used was appropriately. And I thought that was interesting because they didn't define it. And so it is going to be up to the AML officer, which I believe already doesn't have enough authority as it is in 99% of banks. At least in the US, they, are treated as a faux officer, if you will. They're buried, they're under the chief risk officer, under the chief compliance officer, who's under the president, or maybe even under the COO, or who's under, they are buried, meaning they don't have real authority. And so for somebody to define the word appropriately involve, unfortunately, I think it's going to be the person that has the illusion of authority, the AML officer, that's going to be banging on that ceiling going, no, no, no. Appropriately means I need to be in every conversation before we decide as a board, as an executive management team, about whether or not we go down this crypto path. And unfortunately, I think that's not going to happen. But I think if you can invite yourself to those meetings, if you're an AML officer and you're hearing rumblings from the board or from executive management, and they keep asking your opinion, for every conversation they're having with you, they're probably having 10 that don't involve you. And so I would make sure it's on record. There's emails to the board secretary, to whoever, saying like, hey, I need to be involved in these. And it says appropriately involve. And what's appropriate is you should be involving me in these early stage discussions. So I wish that the guidelines would have put out a clear, de minimis steps of sorts, but they did not. But they did talk about how there's some customer misinformation, or that a customer of the bank could be misinformed. And I thought that was interesting. While it's not directly related to the financial crime aspect, I think that in order for the AML position to not stand in the way um, of innovation, and I'm a huge proponent of the AML function thinking as creatively as they do about how criminals can move money, use that same creative thinking about how you can leverage all of your existing technology to help drive revenue for your bank. And this is one of the ways. When they talk about in the safeguarding or the safekeeping, when they talk about the customer being misinformed, for me, that means that the AML officer, along with your head of specialty banking or whatever that division is called, should be making sure that that crypto company that you're engaging with, that your bank is not hidden in the threads of Reddit somewhere, right? Or buried in the T's and C's of the crypto web of that website. You want to make sure that you, as a bank partner, that you're not just vetting that crypto company, But also, how are they advertising? How are they gaining their market share? Do they use finfluencers? All of those are questions for me that belong shared in that due diligence bucket with your head of AML and your head of specialty banking or head of fintech banking, head of crypto banking. One of the things I've talked about for a long time is a well-written customer agreement. They do talk about that in here. Again, they don't tell you the things that you have to have. So unfortunately, a lot of banks just solely rely on whatever boilerplate that lawyer has used with other banks. And I have seen boilerplate master services agreements bite banks in the butt more times than I have not. So I would encourage you to get an attorney that is creative. You as the AML officer should have conversations with that attorney, and it should be a learning session where you are learning from that attorney and they are telling you, actually, this part of this crypto business is regulated under the MSB laws, and then this part of your crypto business that you're looking at is not. How do you want to address that in the master services agreement? There's great conversations that should be happening, and unfortunately it's not. But now a well-written customer agreement is part of the demand here from the agencies. So they do go through, but they do talk about audit, of course. They talk about how strong audit programs are critical to making sure. So I would, if you are a community bank or a regional bank and you're thinking about dabbling in the crypto space in any capacity, have your AML officer in that board meeting every single meeting when y'all are talking about this, and every single executive meeting where y'all are even just discussing this. If they're brought in at the very end when y'all have decided everything, you've already told the sales folks to go do this, and then you hand this fully baked idea to the AML officer, you like that's not going to go over well. And that's certainly not a team player, certainly not telling them that they have the real authority that they are supposed to have under the law. But also, it's going to put you behind the eight ball because there was so much work and so much vetting and so much research that an AML officer would have been able to do if they would have been included on the original conversations. To include audit companies. If you have used, an accounting firm since the beginning of time to perform your AML audit, and then now all of a sudden you think that they know how to audit complex crypto, you probably have some more learning to do. But you wouldn't know that because you didn't invite the AML officer to these discussions. So I would encourage you, if you're a bank executive, board member, and you're listening, you're probably not, but if you are, involve your AML officer early and often in these types of discussions. Very quickly, there was an OFAC penalty issued this week against Interactive Brokers. Several lessons. I posted a whole bunch of takeaways on LinkedIn, but it was about a $12 million penalty. It was down from 5.2 billion, I think, with a B, meaning that was the statutory max that OFAC could have penalized them with, and they went with the 11.8 million. And part of the mitigating factors was because Interactive Brokers, one, it was self-disclosed, so they found it on their own. They reported it, and then they on their own invested $10 million of their own money, clearly, to remediate, to staff it correctly, to have the right technology, to do these audits, to do this cleanup. And while it's a big global firm, there are smaller variations of investment and securities firms that I think we can learn from, because a lot of them aren't doing any of this. And by any of this, I mean any of the checking. They aren't hiring hunters, if you will, right? They aren't hiring people that can go and look under that rock and look under that rock to see what sanctions risks are out there. And so if you're a global company of any kind, right, whether you're a manufacturer or, in the financial services industry at all, investments, traditional financial institution, crypto, et cetera, you should have enough people on staff in that sanctions and AML function. So sanctions if you're a non-financial institution, sanctions in AML if you are an FI of some kind. But you should have enough people where they have enough bandwidth. Again, this comes down to bandwidth. They have enough bandwidth during the day to get creative and go, you know what? The other day I saw this free form field that people keep putting data into, and I just want to go see whether or not that data is part of what gets screened. If it's part of what is getting screened, then the next question is how often, what's the matching algorithm what are they screening against? Are they only looking for names? Are they using a Boolean search? Are they using a Levenstein matching algorithm? What is happening in this free form field? If somebody were to be putting in there for a country in the north, like the sanctions penalty from last week, um, for the country in the north, and they're trying to evade sanctions, is that something that you're able to search and find, either using your own searching tools or using your sanction screening? So I think those are good reminders for all of us. And again, this comes down to people. So if you hear me saying this and you're like, well, yeah, that's nice and all, but I'm already short like 3 people, I, you know I don't know how to fix that for you, but I know that doing your own staffing assessment and having your own risk acceptance form, an RAF, which I've offered, I think, in one of the first or second episodes, but it's a form that basically is your formal cry for help. Hey, I am understaffed, and a company just like ours just received a $12 million penalty. It could have been 5.2 billion for these things, and I don't know where we sit on any of this. I can't tell you whether or not we're safe from sanctions issues because I don't have enough time. And that's where it has to go in your risk assessment update to the board. It has to be a bright red value box saying, I am understaffed. It needs to be in that risk acceptance form. And it should also be in emails. And of course, it's never fun to ask for more people because a lot of times you hear no. But like in any negotiation, you start high, right? You start with, hey, I need 4 bodies. And they're like, oh, what? No one's going to get four bodies. And then hopefully somewhere you end up with 1 to 2 people. But I think it's something, especially this penalty, that we have to make sure if you're global, it's not just a IP blocking issue at the country level. You also have to look at major cities and regions like Crimea, which was in this order. And somebody had posted on my LinkedIn post that compliance is not just a technology solution. And I thought, yes, I mean, that is a great statement, right? The thing that would have saved interactive brokers is not the best technology in the world. 100% accurate. You still have to have people and humans. And that's what I said in my post, right? Time is of the essence. And so you need critical thinkers that are used to and very familiar with where your data sits, because your data is not clean. Most data, especially in large global firms, there's a whole bunch of places where your data could sit. And you may not have access to all that data. And that's where getting your hands around data first is going to drive whether or not you're truly compliant with sanctions restrictions. So I know we're at time. Please go check out the post that I posted about the penalty from OFAC. But I wanted to talk really quickly. I'm going to try and make this like 2 minutes because this week we saw 2 big issues. Barclays was fined again today, or again this week by the FCA, 42 million pounds. Separate instances, they had failures in their AML, essentially their know your customer and their due diligence processes that allowed 2 different companies to be shady and run their dirty money through Barclays. I thought it was interesting, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because one of the investment firms, uh, the FCA stated that if Barclays would have just gone out to their version of SEC or FINRA or CFTC, but over in the UK, if they would have just gone out to see whether or not this company that they onboarded was actually legally allowed to accept investor funds, then they would have seen that they were not, and that they would not have gone forward with the relationship. And I think about this all the time because as a former Series 7 stock broker, I, I can never fully separate my life, my past, my very early career, um, from how I think. And so I'm always looking at SEC, CFTC, and FINRA sites from the securities and investment companies. And when I'm looking at those press releases, my first question that comes to mind is, I cannot believe this investment company bilked all these people out of tens of millions of dollars. Why didn't the bank do something? And I will say, most banks that I'm in, they aren't thinking like that, right? They get an investment company, and because there's no cash typically involved in the investment company, they aren't really giving them the bucket of hyper focusing of threats that are particular to investment and securities companies that they should be given, because we all use this, wire and ACH, and whether or not you're a domestic person associated with a business, we use this finite form of risk rating of a customer, and 9 times out of 10 those investment companies don't fit that generic mold, and therefore they fly under the radar, which allows them to keep bilking people out of their retirement. And I think that needs to change, and I think that starts with our bank examiners in the US. We need to make sure that all these investment firms that are, from these little tiny investment firms to these big ones, that banks have clear guidelines on how to bank them safely, right? Not that they're the de facto regulator. Banks are not the de facto regulator of those securities companies, right? That is the SEC, et cetera. But there should absolutely be some expectations through notices from our sister banking agencies about, hey, these are the red flags to look for, so you don't end up like Barclays in the UK. And then finally, my closing statement is about Andorra. Beautiful country between France and Spain, little tiny country. But today, breaking news, AML Intelligence, I believe, was one of the first ones that broke the news. But the top court in Andorra sentenced 18 executives of this bank that was a bank of primary money laundering a concern back, I think, a decade ago from a FinCEN. This private bank in Andorra, 18 executives were sentenced to prison for up to 7 years. Wow. The day, right? The day that we see any US bank executive actually wear orange is, I mean, I doubt I'll ever see that day, at least throughout my career. But, I'm definitely having a little bit of FOMO because we're looking, we see these little tiny countries that are really taking drastic steps to make sure that banks understand it's not just a financial penalty, which Jim Richards talks about all the time. He does great math every time there's a penalty. And his statement is basically, great, so you paid this penalty. That's, some 0.00005% of your revenue. That's not a deterrent. And he's spot on. Jail time is a deterrent. And while I'm not calling for particular jail time of certain bank executives or bank board members, I definitely think that we have to at least entertain the idea that a bank executive could be the guiltiest of all the parties when a bank misses suspicious activity. And I think, unfortunately, we always look at the AML officer as the person who failed, when it's really the person we know who's in true authority, not the AML officer who has the illusion of authority. So if you want, you should check out that article. It was pretty interesting because they got prison sentences and they also got fines. So kind of like a big news day, I guess. But I think that's the end of my time. I know I've gone over by quite a bit and I apologize, but there were a lot of things to talk about. And if you have any questions, if you're dealing with an audit firm and you don't understand or you don't know whether or not this audit firm is going to serve you correctly, please reach out. I field questions all the time. I give away so much free stuff. It's not even funny. Like if you want a good audit scope and you want to send back to your audit firm how you want your audit run, I would be happy to give you one of my old audit scopes that I used to use for my clients. So with that, happy Friday. Please go watch the Open. That is this weekend. I'm wearing my Old Course hat. Well, it's not played at the Old Course this year, but it has been played at the Old Course over 30 times in the history of the British Open. And shout out to my friend Linda Hamilton, who's there at the Open. And have fun, and may the best man win. And we'll catch y'all next week. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.